My husband took his whole family on vacation without me for the third consecutive year. This time I chose not to argue about it. My phone buzzed at 7:58 p.m. on a Saturday. A text from my husband. A photo attached. 22 people crowded around a long table on a screened-in porch in Naples, Florida, string lights strung overhead, a spread of grilled snapper and key lime pie between them. I wasn't in it. Third year in a row. I sat there at my kitchen counter and looked at the photo for exactly as long as it took me to finish my glass of wine. Then I poured another one, opened my laptop, and did not cry. My name is Julia Bennett, Julia Reyes, before I married into this family 11 years ago, and I process residential mortgage loans for a regional bank in Ohio, underwriting review specifically. I spend 40 hours a week reading fine print for a paycheck, promissory notes, deeds of trust, personal guarantees, the kind of documents most people sign without reading past the highlighted line. That skill was about to matter more than my husband Mark ever understood. 2 years earlier, I'd been looking for a stapler in the filing cabinet in our home office and found a loan statement instead. My name was on it. $240,000, secured by a commercial property in Sarasota I had never seen and never heard of. I hadn't signed it. I know my own signature. I've signed thousands of loan documents at work, and I've watched thousands of borrowers sign theirs. My J leans left, a habit from a high school English teacher who told me cursive was a lost art and I should at least commit to my own initial. The signature on that statement leaned right. The tail on the A curled up instead of flattening out. Someone had forged it. I didn't tell Mark. I told myself I needed to understand what I was looking at before I said anything. That was the underwriter in me, the part of my brain trained not to flag a file until I could explain exactly what was wrong with it. So I started digging, quietly, on my own time. Mark's mother, Carol Bennett, ran the family business, Bennett Family Development, a commercial real estate outfit that had been building strip malls and mixed-use properties across the Gulf Coast since the early 2000s. Mark held the title of Vice President of Operations, which in practice meant he signed whatever Carol put in front of him and rarely asked what it was for. He'd tell you himself, if you caught him in an honest mood, that his mother handled the finance side and he handled the people side. I used to think that division of labor was almost sweet. Naive, but sweet. I was never invited to the family vacations. Carol had a way of saying it that made it sound like a compliment. I asked too many questions. I made things stressful. The trips were immediate family only, Julia, you understand? For the first year, I understood. For the second, I resented it quietly and let it go. The way you let go of 100 small slights from a mother-in-law because picking every one of them up costs more than it's worth. By the third year, I'd stopped resenting it. I'd started paying attention instead. The first strange detail was small enough that I almost let it go. A UPS envelope addressed to Mark from a title company in Sarasota, delivered to our house instead of the Bennett Family Development office 40 minutes away. I told myself it was nothing. Companies mail things to home addresses sometimes. Mark had signed for building permits before. Small stuff, nothing that needed my attention. But I was curious, and curiosity is a professional hazard in my line of work. I opened it before he got home from the site he was walking that day. Inside was a personal guarantee, a document where an individual pledges their own assets to back a company's debt for a commercial loan on a property called Coral Trace Plaza. $91,000. My signature was on the guarantor line, next to Mark's. My hands went cold before my brain caught up to why. I pulled up the loan statement I'd found 2 years earlier, the one for the Sarasota property, and set them side by side on our dining table. 2 signatures. Same forged J. Same wrong-leaning tail on the A. I called the title company, Gulf Coast Title and Escrow, and asked as calmly as I could manage whether they had a notarized copy of the guarantee on file. The woman who answered was polite and unbothered. Sure thing, one moment. She pulled it up, read me the notary's name, and asked if there was a problem. I said no. I said thank you. I hung up and sat very still for a long time. The notary listed was a woman named Denise Farrow. I had never met a Denise Farrow in my life. I had certainly never sat across from her and had my identity verified, the way notarization is supposed to work. I looked her up anyway, half expecting to find a legitimate notary somewhere in Sarasota whose stamp had simply been used without her knowledge, which would have been its own kind of crime, but a smaller one, 1 degree removed from Carol. I found nothing. No notary public listing under that name in Sarasota County, no LinkedIn profile, no trace of a Denise Farrow tied to any title company in the state. The name existed only on that one document, as far as I could tell, invented specifically to fill a blank line. I tried to fix it the only way that felt safe. I mentioned to Mark, casually, over dinner, that I'd gotten a strange piece of mail from a title company. "Oh, that's probably just paperwork for the Coral Trace refi," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Mom handles all that. Don't worry about it." My name was on it, Mark. "Yeah, we're both guarantors on some of the older loans. It's a corporate structure thing." He said it the way you'd explain a mildly boring fact about tax filing status. He had no idea. I could see that clearly, and it was almost worse than if he'd known. I let it drop, but I didn't stop looking. That week, on a slow Tuesday at work, I pulled up our bank's own signature verification module, the same software I use to flag suspicious loan files for a living, and ran it off the clock against a scanned copy of my real signature and the forged one from the Coral Trace guarantee. It wasn't standard procedure to run a personal document through work software, and I knew it, and I did it anyway during my lunch break with the office door half closed. The system flagged a 34% match confidence, well below the 80% threshold we use to clear clear a signature as authentic. I printed the report, folded it twice, and put it in the folder Mark didn't know existed. I told myself that printout was just for my own peace of mind. It wasn't. It was the first piece of evidence in a file I hadn't yet admitted I was building. The second thing I noticed took almost a year to add up because it wasn't a document, it was a pattern. Every family vacation ended the same way. Carol would announce, usually around the third day, that the final night would be a family dinner, always framed as sentimental, always described afterward by Mark's sisters as so nice, Mom really outdid herself. And every year, without fail, Mark would come home from those trips slightly sunburned, mildly hungover, and carrying a manila folder he'd tuck into his desk drawer without a word. I told myself it was nothing. Family businesses do paperwork on vacation sometimes. Efficient, even. Then I found copies of 3 of those folders. Mark is not a careful man about where he leaves things, and I am, unfortunately for the Bennetts, a careful woman about noticing what's been left. Inside were refinancing agreements, ownership transfers between LLCs I didn't recognize, and 2 more personal guarantees. Same forged signature. Same absent notary, a different name each time. Denise Farrow, then a Kenneth Ruiz, then a Patricia Ames. I looked all 3 up. None of them held an active notary commission in the state of Florida. I checked the Florida Department of State's public commission database myself at my kitchen table at 11 at night. My stomach dropped the way it does at work when a file that looked routine turns out to be sitting on a foundation of nothing. I sat with those 3 fake names for a long time that night. Denise Farrow, Kenneth Ruiz, Patricia Ames, and something about seeing them listed together, 3 invented people standing in for a real legal requirement, made the whole thing feel less like carelessness and more like architecture. Carelessness doesn't invent a new fictional notary every single time. Carelessness reuses the same shortcut because it's lazy. This wasn't lazy. This was someone making sure no single fabricated identity appeared twice, spreading the risk thin across names that would never individually raise a flag. That was when I understood what the vacations actually were. They weren't vacations. They were signing ceremonies, dressed up as family time. Every year, at the end of the trip, Carol gathered everyone around a table, full bellies, a few drinks in, the specific kind of goodwill that makes people sign things without reading them, and had them execute new paperwork, refinancing, transfers, guarantees. The whole extended family, present and accounted for, creating exactly the kind of witnessed. Everyone was there and nobody objected atmosphere that makes fraud hard to unwind later. They needed the room clear of anyone who might actually read the documents before signing them. That's why I was never on the list. I tried to fix it the only way I knew how at the time. I asked Mark directly whether he'd ever actually read what he signed at those dinners. He got defensive in a way I'd never seen from him before. Jaw tight, voice clipped. Why does it matter? It's my mom's company. I trust her. That's not what I asked. Julia, I'm not doing this. Not everything is a fraud investigation. I didn't push further that night, but I started keeping copies of everything I found in a folder of my own. One Mark didn't know existed, backed up to a cloud drive he'd never think to check. I also started watching Carol differently at family gatherings. The ordinary ones, the 4th of July barbecue, the occasional Sunday dinner where I was, for whatever reason, still permitted at the table. She had a specific way of talking about the business in front of people, breezy and unspecific, full of phrases like, just moving some things around, and nothing you need to worry your heads about. I'd always read it as a mother protecting her adult children from boring financial details. Now I read it as something closer to a magician narrating a trick while doing something else entirely with her other hand. Once, at a Sunday dinner that spring, she mentioned in passing that the Fort Myers office park had a great new tenant lined up. I asked, as casually as I could manage, who the tenant was. She smiled at me, a specific smile, warm on the surface, with nothing underneath it, and said, "Oh, Julia, don't worry, that's not something you'd need to track." I smiled back and said nothing further. I already knew, from the notice of default I'd pulled 2 weeks earlier, that there was no tenant. There was a lender running out of patience. The third thing I found explained why. I'd assumed for a while that Carol was simply careless, cutting corners on notarization, moving fast, treating her family's signatures as a formality rather than a legal act. I told myself that was reckless, maybe even a little unethical, but not necessarily criminal. People cut corners. I'd seen sloppier things get explained away at closings. Then I pulled the public property records for every address named in the 3 guarantees I'd found, because that's what I do at work when a file doesn't sit right. I stopped trusting the borrower's version and go find the underlying asset. All 3 properties were underwater. Coral Trace Plaza had lost its anchor tenant 18 months earlier and was carrying a vacancy rate over 60%. The Sarasota property from the very first statement I'd found had a tax lien filed against it. The third, a small office park in Fort Myers, had been served with a notice of default from its lender 4 months before. Carol had my name added as guarantor on a new refinance. Every property Carol was quietly attaching my signature to was already failing. She wasn't building anything. She was moving losses onto paper that had my name on it, one guarantee at a time, so that when the debt eventually came due, there would be an asset, me, my income, my credit, my name, standing behind it that wasn't hers. My hands were shaking by the time I finished cross-referencing the third property. Not metaphorically. I actually had to set my coffee down. I tried one more time to fix this the ordinary way. I called Mark's older sister, Denise, no relation to the fake notary. An unsettling coincidence I noticed, and and then had to set aside, and asked carefully whether she'd ever had any documents she signed at the family dinners come back to surprise her later. She laughed, not unkindly, and said, "Julia, honestly, I don't even read those. Mom says it's just year-end housekeeping stuff. You're really not on this?" No follow-up, no concern, just mild surprise that I was asking. I realized, sitting with the phone still warm against my ear, that I wasn't going to get anywhere talking to family. Whatever this was, it had already been normalized inside the family for years, long enough that nobody but me was still looking closely enough to see the shape of it. I stopped trying to fix it quietly. I started building a file instead, the kind of file I'd want to see if this crossed my desk at work. Dates, statements, property records, the tax lien, the notice of default. A side-by-side of every forged signature I could find. 7 at that point, going back 4 years. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed it to exist. I started keeping a written timeline too, separate from the documents themselves. Dates I'd found each piece, dates of the vacations, dates of the notices of default I'd pulled. Underwriters live and die by timelines. A file with events in the wrong order is a file that falls apart the first time someone asks a hard question about it. I wanted mine to hold. One entry from that October reads simply, "Fort Myers Nod, dated 4 months before guarantee. Ask Rebecca if that matters." I didn't have a Rebecca yet. I wrote her name in the margin anyway, a placeholder for the person I already suspected I'd eventually need. The fourth thing I found, I wasn't even looking for. Carol's assistant, a 24-year-old named Ashley, who'd been with Bennett Family Development for less than a year, had left a shared company drive open on a laptop she'd forgotten at our house after a 4th of July gathering. The one family event I was, technically, allowed to attend, since it happened at our place, and Carol couldn't very well exclude me from my own kitchen. I told myself I shouldn't look. I looked anyway. 18 months into quietly documenting a pattern of forged signatures with my name on them, I had stopped extending anyone in that family the benefit of the doubt, including myself about my own boundaries. Inside a folder labeled FL 2025 Logistics, I found the full itinerary for that year's Florida trip. Flights, the rental house address in Naples, a dinner reservation for the first night at a restaurant on 5th Avenue South. And on the final page, under a header in bold, "Final night, signing ceremony, 7:30 p.m., main table." Beneath it, a list. Coral Trace Plaza refinance. New entity, Bennett Coastal Holdings, LLC. A beachfront property on Vanderbilt Drive, currently in default. Debt to be transferred into the new entity and re-guaranteed. My name listed under Guarantor, J. Bennett, next to a draft document already saved in the folder. BC Holdings, personal guarantee, draft, v3.pdf. I opened it with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My signature was already on it. Signed, dated 3 weeks in the future. The date of the final night dinner that hadn't happened yet. Forged. Before I'd even said no. Before anyone had asked me anything at all. That was the moment 2 years of quiet documentation stopped being enough. This wasn't a historical pattern I could someday, eventually, decide what to do about. This was an active forgery, dated for an event 11 days away, for a property already in default on a beach I'd never walked on, and it had my name locked into it before I'd had the chance to refuse. I closed the laptop. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, the ceiling fan turning overhead, and I made myself think like the person I am at work, instead of the person I'd been in this marriage. At work, when I find a file like this, I don't confront the borrower directly and hope they stop. I document, I verify, and I escalate to someone whose job it is to act on it. I looked up mortgage and title fraud attorneys in our county that same night. I found one with a track record in exactly this kind of case: family entity fraud, forged guarantees, the specific mechanics of debt laundered through shell LLCs. Her name was Rebecca Holloway. Her firm's website had a section called Representative Matters that described, in the careful, vague language lawyers use, 3 cases that sounded uncomfortably close to my own: a family construction business, a set of forged guarantor signatures, a resolution that involved coordinated notice and law enforcement referral. I read it twice before I let myself believe it wasn't a coincidence, that this was in fact a known shape of crime, common enough that a lawyer 40 minutes from my house had a track record handling it. I called her office first thing Monday morning, before my own shift started, sitting in my car in the bank parking lot with the engine off and the folder open on the passenger seat. Rebecca Holloway had been practicing real estate and fraud litigation for 19 years. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a converted bank building downtown, which struck me, walking in, as almost too on the nose. I laid out everything on her conference table: 7 forged signatures across 4 years, 3 fake notary identities, the property records showing the underlying assets were failing, and the draft guarantee with a signature dated 11 days in the future. She went quiet for a long moment, turning pages. "You've been documenting this for 2 years?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." She sat back. "Then we're not going to stop them from signing it." I stared at her. "What?" "We're going to let them sign it. Tonight. With witnesses. On camera." I didn't understand yet. She explained it the way I imagined she'd explained it to dozens of clients before me, patiently, like someone walking a borrower through a term they'd never encountered. Old forgeries, she said, could be explained away in court. A careless assistant. A clerical mix-up. A pattern a defense attorney could spend months muddying into miscommunication within a family business. 4 years of it was damning, but Carol's lawyers would still find room to argue confusion, information formality, the messy way families sometimes run companies together. A brand new forgery, though, one dated after Carol had received formal written notice that I explicitly refused to authorize it. That wasn't a mistake anymore. That was intent, documented in real time. We serve her now, Rebecca said. Certified letter, return receipt required, stating in writing that you have not authorized and will not authorize any guarantee on your behalf for the Vanderbilt Drive refinance or the Bennett Coastal Holdings entity. If they go through with the signing ceremony anyway, after that notice, we have something a lot stronger than a pattern. We have proof they knew. I asked her what would happen if they simply didn't sign. If Carol got the notice, understood what it meant, and quietly called the whole thing off, then nothing happens tonight, Rebecca said. And we still have 4 years of forged signatures and a case that doesn't need this specific dinner to move forward. This isn't a trap that only works one way, Julia. It's a test. Either she stops, which tells us she understood the risk, or she doesn't, which tells us everything else. Rebecca brought in a forensic document examiner, a man named Arthur Pell, who'd spent 22 years with the state attorney's office before going into private practice, to formally verify what I'd already suspected about the signatures. His office was nothing like I expected. No dramatic magnifying glass, just 3 monitors and a light table, and a manner so unhurried it made the whole process feel almost clinical, which I found strangely calming after 2 years of doing this alone in a panic. He compared all 7 forged instances against 3 years of my authentic signatures, pulled from work records with my employer's cooperation, and confirmed in a signed report that the guarantor signatures were highly inconsistent with genuine exemplars across pressure, stroke direction, and letter formation, his term for what I'd been calling the wrong-leaning J for 2 years. He also flagged something I'd missed entirely. All 7 forged signatures showed nearly identical stroke pressure and timing, the kind of consistency that comes from tracing rather than freehand replication. Someone practiced this, he told Rebecca and me, sliding a comparison sheet across the table, or someone traced it directly from an existing exemplar. This wasn't done in a hurry, and it wasn't done once. Rebecca sent the notice by certified mail 3 days before the family left for Florida. Ashley, the same assistant whose laptop had started this final chapter, signed for it at the Bennett Family Development Office. They flew to Florida anyway. Rebecca had one more piece in place before the trip, a call to the Fraud and Compliance Division at the bank holding the Vanderbilt Drive default, a woman named Marisol Ortega, who'd spent 11 years handling exactly this category of case, forged guarantor instruments on commercial defaults. Rebecca sent her the notice of refusal, Arthur's forensic report, and a sworn statement from me the same week the family flew out. Marisol's team flagged the Bennett Coastal Holdings account for review, pending confirmation of what happened that final night. I didn't fly to Florida. I stayed home, alone, in the house I'd shared with Mark for 11 years, and I did the one thing I'd asked to have in place before any of this started. The security camera mounted above our living room TV, the one Mark used to check on the house when we traveled, connected to an app on my phone. I turned it on remotely that evening and left it running. Rebecca sat across from me at my own kitchen table that night, her laptop open beside mine, watching the same feed. The final night dinner went forward exactly as the itinerary said it would. 22 people, a long table strung with lights, champagne going around. I recognized the porch from the photo that had started all of this. 3 hours earlier and 1,000 miles away. I watched the folder in Carol's hand for most of the meal, the same manila folder I'd seen in Mark's desk drawer a dozen times over the years, always tucked away without comment. It sat by her plate through the appetizers, through the entrees, through a toast one of the sisters gave about another wonderful year together as a family that made my stomach turn in a way I hadn't expected. Even after everything, I wasn't there, but I watched. Carol stood at the head of the table, a folder in her hand, laughing at something one of the grandchildren had said. Mark sat near her, his phone face down beside his plate, exactly the way he always kept it around his mother, a habit I'd never once thought to question until that night. Ready? Rebecca asked me. I didn't answer right away. 2 years of quiet digging sat behind that one word. 2 years of forged signatures with my name stretched across debt I'd never agreed to carry. 2 years of empty chairs at every table that mattered, and a lifetime, it felt like, in that moment of being told I asked too many questions by people who very badly needed me not to. Do it, I said. Rebecca picked up her phone and made one call, to Marisol, confirming the signing had occurred as documented on the live feed, time-stamped, with Rebecca herself as an eyewitness to the moment of execution. On the screen, 1,000 miles away, Carol's smile froze mid-sentence. Her phone was buzzing, then Mark's. Then both of his sisters' phones lit up at once, all 4 screens glowing at the same table. The fraud alert Marisol's team had cued the moment confirmation came through. Mark looked down at his phone first. His face went white. He turned slowly toward his mother, the chair scraping against the floor behind him. "Mom," he said, loud enough that the whole table went silent. "Why is our account frozen?" The account freeze was only the beginning of what came apart that week. Marisol Ortega's team completed their internal review within 4 business days, cross-referencing Arthur's forensic report against the bank's own signature records for prior Bennett family development guarantees. The bank's fraud division formally referred the matter to the county sheriff's office, along with a parallel referral to the Florida Office of Financial Regulation, given the fake notarizations Arthur had also flagged in his report. Notary fraud being a separate offense from the forgery itself, Rebecca explained, and one that made the case considerably harder for Carol's attorneys to characterize as an isolated mistake. Detective Raymond Osei caught the case out of the Economic Crimes Unit, 14 years with the sheriff's office, the last 6 specifically in financial fraud. He interviewed me twice, once by phone and once in person with Rebecca present, walking through every document in the file I'd built: the 7 signatures, the property records, the 3 fake notary identities, the time-stamped security footage Rebecca had already preserved and handed over as evidence the same week. Most people don't have 2 years of documentation ready to go, he told me near the end of the second interview. Usually we're building this from nothing. You built most of it yourself. He asked at one point whether I'd ever considered going to the police earlier, before Rebecca, before Arthur's report, back when I'd first found the loan statement in the filing cabinet. I told him the honest answer, that I hadn't trusted what I had yet, that a wrong-leaning J and a gut feeling weren't the same thing as evidence, and that I'd spent 2 years making sure that if I ever did walk into a room like this one, I'd be walking in with a file too complete to argue with. He nodded slowly, the way I imagine he does with people who did exactly the opposite. That's not nothing, he said. That's most of the case, honestly. Carol was charged with 3 counts of forgery and 2 counts of uttering a forged instrument under Florida law, along with a separate count tied to the fraudulent notarizations. She surrendered her real estate license voluntarily before the state board could act on it, according to Rebecca, who heard it secondhand from opposing counsel. Bennett Family Development brought in an outside CFO within a month, at the insistence of the bank, as a condition of not calling the entire loan portfolio due immediately. Mark didn't find out what his mother had done to me until that night on the porch. I believe that much completely. I'd watched his face on the camera feed, and there was no performance in it. But finding out and reckoning with it turned out to be 2 different things, and it took him considerably longer to do the second one than I expected. We separated 4 months later, not because he defended her. He didn't, not once, not even at Thanksgiving when Carol's sisters accused me of destroying the family over paperwork, but because I'd spent 2 years carrying a secret that should never have been mine to carry alone. And once I set it down, I found I didn't want to pick the marriage back up the same way either. Rebecca, when I told her, said that was more common than people think. The fraud is rarely the only thing that breaks, she said. It's usually just the first thing anyone looks at directly. I still process mortgage loans for a living. I still read fine print for a paycheck, the way I have for 11 years. Last month, a colleague 2 desks over flagged a personal guarantee that didn't sit right with her. A signature that looked slightly off, a notary stamp she couldn't quite place. She brought it to me instead of her supervisor, because word travels in an office, even about the things you never meant to become known for. I looked at it for less than a minute before I told her what to check first. Some skills you learn because you love the work. Others you learn because someone spent 4 years betting you'd never look closely enough to notice. I'm not grateful for how I learned mine, but I don't regret knowing it either.